This is Shakespeare's birthplace. It's a timber frame house standing on Henley Street in the centre of Stratford Upon Avon. The oak for the building's framework came from the nearby Forest of Arden and is infilled with panels of wattle and daub. I like the fact that the wood for the house was locally sourced. This isn't the house Shakespeare would have recognised though, as it was extensively restored by the Victorians. No one knows exactly when the house was built, but probably it was built in the 15th to 16th century. The house then would have been considered to be quite a big home. Today, it is considered a relatively simple dwelling. John Shakespeare, William's father, was living here by 1552, and after his marriage to Mary Arden in 1557, she came to live there as well. Shakespeare married Anne Hathaway in 1582, and they moved into his family home here in Henley Street together with his parents. The first thing that you do is go into the visitor centre, which has various exhibits, but it's a bit too dark to film, and although interesting, it's not the main reason for the visit here. You pass through the visitor centre and come out into the garden. It's a lovely garden, it's very calm, it's relaxed. The garden we're walking in now is a modern planting. The area would originally have been used to process skin and leather for glove making, which was one of John Shakespeare's jobs. One thing we can be fairly certain of is that it did not look as it does today. You walk around the outside of the house until you come to the visitor's entrance. The first place you go into is the small attached cottage on the left known as Hart's house. It was built about 20 years after the main house and was lived in by Shakespeare's sister Joan Hart and her husband William Hart. The doorway that leads into Joan Hart's rooms and also the internal doorway into the parlour are not original. They are inserted for the purpose of visitor flow through the building. It was originally a self-contained structure with the only entrance being at the front of the building, which is now disused. I'm now standing with my back to the fireplace and I'm about to go into the parlour. The parlour was the warmest room in the house and would have functioned as the guest bedroom, where business was conducted and important guests were entertained. If you look down, you will see a stone floor made of blue lias limestone, believed to be original, and it's the oldest thing in the house. We might just be walking on the exact same floor that Shakespeare once used to walk on. The blue lias limestone floor in this parlour was quarried from the nearby Wilmcote quarry. Just like the wooden beams for the house, it was sourced locally. The bed here was the best bed in the house. Beyond the parlour is the hall, which was where the family would have eaten and was their main living area. It's furnished with a reproduction trestle table, long bench, boarded stool, closed armchair, press cupboard and joined stool, all typical of the period. The working day would start early. Shakespeare started his grammar school at 6 in the morning. He would return home at 11 o'clock for his meal, then go back to school and come home again at 5 p.m. Now we enter the workshop where gloves were made and sold. Goat, calf, deer and dog skin were used to make the gloves, and they would have been tanned in the backyard and were lined with rabbit skin. Hello. Shakespeare's dad John was a wealthy glove maker and wool dealer and ran his business from these premises. William probably helped when he was growing up, as his work is full of references to glove making. In Henry V, "This is my glove, by this hand I will take thee a box on the ear." In A Winter's Tale, "Come, you promised me a tawdry lace and a pair of sweet gloves." Stairs from the workshop lead to the first floor, where there are 3 bedrooms. The boys slept in this, the first room. William shared his bedroom and his bed with his 2 brothers. Through this room and on the left was the room used by the girls. In here is the birthplace window, which was inscribed by early tourists to the house, including Dickens and Byron. It had no fireplace, so it would have been cold there, and it was on top of the workshop, so it must have smelled quite bad up there. There is a little storage area above. You come out of the girls' area and back into the boys' room. Through the boys' room you come to Shakespeare's birth room, where his mum and dad would have slept. The marital bed was the second best bed after the guest bed, which is downstairs in the parlour. Shakespeare left his second best bed to Anne Hathaway in his will. After Shakespeare's dad's death in 1601, as the eldest surviving child, William inherited the house. When Shakespeare moved to London, the property was let out and became an inn called the Maidenhead, and later the Swan and Maidenhead. The tour finishes here in the 17th century extension at the back of the house, which was built when it became an inn. At one time it had 13 rooms. Here's the sign for the inn, the Swan and Maidenhead. Downstairs is where food was prepared, and also where the drinking area was. The fireplace is either really big or Lisa is really small. Probably a mix of the two. You leave the house back into the garden. After a rest in the garden with time to soak up the Shakespearean ambience, you go through the obligatory gift shop where you can buy all things Shakespeare.
It looks so easy. Oh my. Some people have paperwork gets me so out of
Then it's back out into Henley Street and make your way down High Street to Nash House and Shakespeare's new place.
Hello. I'd be Shakespeare.
This is the corner of High Street and is the place where Shakespeare's daughter Judith lived with her husband Thomas Quinney. Thomas's father and Shakespeare's friend Richard Quinney, a cloth merchant, lived on the opposite side of the street. This route going down High Street would still be familiar to Shakespeare as it hasn't changed much since 1600. We are just strolling down High Street now on the way to New Place. Shakespeare bought his new house for £120 in 1597 at the age of 33. New Place was his family home where he focused on being a full-time writer. It would have had at least 20 rooms and gave Shakespeare and his family impressive social status. The house was demolished in the 18th century. The gatehouse is where Shakespeare's front door used to be. This strongbox is a symbol of Shakespeare's wealth and status. Over here is the globe, with the axis running straight through Stratford Upon Avon. Walking past the talks table to the well. This well would have served the new place. This is a sculpture called His Mind's Eye, which represents Shakespeare's creativity and genius. Just behind the sculpture is Shakespeare's chair and desk. It's made from wood and cast in bronze, but it was never Shakespeare's. It simply represents his life as a working writer and is symbolic of what was used in the Elizabethan era. It's good fun to pose in the chair. Passing through the yew walk, you enter the great garden. The mulberry tree here at the far end of the garden is believed to have been planted by Shakespeare himself, or at least grown from a cut-in taken from a tree grown by Shakespeare. This is the Pall Mall monument, made by Thomas Banks in 1788. It sits at the far end of the garden behind the mulberry bush. Sculptures in the garden are by Greg Wyatt and are meant to evoke Shakespeare's plays. When Shakespeare bought the house, it had 2 gardens and 2 orchards. This is called the Knott Garden, which leads you to the house next door, which has 2 floors of information about how the new place would have looked and how Shakespeare and his family lived. Back out onto Church Street, we walk the length of this beautiful building before turning left into Old Town, where you pass Hall's Croft on the way to Holy Trinity Church. This is Hall's Croft, where John Hall lived, a son-in-law to Shakespeare, but who was only 11 years younger than Shakespeare. John Hall married Susanna, Shakespeare's first daughter, in 1607 at Holy Trinity Church, which is where we're going next. Shakespeare was baptised at Holy Trinity Church in Stratford Upon Avon on the 26th of April 1564, so was probably born 3 days earlier on the 23rd of April 1564, as the tradition then was to be baptised 3 days after birth. His grave is also here at Holy Trinity Church. Shakespeare died on April the 23rd, 1616, aged 52, and his death is kind of a mystery because no one really knows what happened. He wrote some days prior to his death that he was in perfect health, and then suddenly he died. The only information I can find on how Shakespeare died was written by John Ward, the vicar of Stratford Upon Avon, who wrote in his notebook 50 years after Shakespeare's death, "Shakespeare and 2 friends had a merry meeting, and it seemed drank too hard, for Shakespeare died of a fever there contracted." Shakespeare's last words were, "Et tu, Brute?" famously spoken by Julius Caesar in Shakespeare's play to his friend Brutus, when Brutus, along with other conspirators, stabbed Caesar. Caesar never actually said these words in real life, only in Shakespeare's play. We ended our day with a half-hour walk to the outskirts of Stratford to visit Anne Hathaway's cottage. To get there, we retraced our steps back up Old Town, but instead of turning right back into Church Street, carry on straight until you come to a little footpath that leads to the cottage. It is well signposted. It's so peaceful here away from the busy Stratford. Anne Hathaway's cottage was built in 1463 and started out as a 3-room farmhouse.
Okay, we'll do that. Yeah, if you want to do that, yeah, register your figures.
It just makes me say, oh, look,
You still enter the house through the original front door. The family furniture is still in the house.
I don't spend money in shop.
Anne Hathaway was the daughter of Richard Hathaway, a wealthy yeoman farmer, and when he died in 1581, he left his daughter, a wealthy young woman aged 25. The following year, in 1582, an 18-year-old Shakespeare married the 26-year-old Anne Hathaway, who was already pregnant, and 6 months later, their first child, Susanna, was born. It is thought that the two pledged their union in a hand-fasting ceremony prior to the official church wedding, and was believed by some to be good enough in the eyes of God, and hence not a sin that Anne was already pregnant. Whether hand-fasting is a sin or not is debated in Shakespeare's play Measure for Measure. Two years after Susanna was born, Anne Hathaway gave birth to twins, Hamnet and Judith. Hamnet died at age 11, but Judith lived until she was 77. The staff here are really friendly and take the time to explain the house and the furniture in detail.
So you've gone back a century now. You're in the 16th. Watch your head. Very, very careful now. This is the add-on here. This is Bartholomew's add-on. This wouldn't be here when I was living here. In fact, that's the oldest part. As you go through there, then suddenly you are in the medieval house because it's been altered so much. There wasn't an upstairs. They're time, let's say. So the bed, 1500s. Yeah. And this one.
It's almost like it's been shaped. It's in shape for your head, look.
Also very good for you to work out how to actually talk to people who aren't necessarily on the same wavelength.
Yeah, definitely. I think we've got input in it, but yeah.
Lots of very short sentences. Have a lovely rest of your day. Enjoy your weekend.
Enjoy your graduation.
Oh, thank you.
Ellen Wilmot created the gardens in 1920. There are sculptures that represent Shakespeare's work, and there's a lovely orchard to walk around.